The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. I would like to end with this thought, that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
they included kids and like was a message that wasn't too like complicated. Mm-hmm. So people were able to understand it easily. That it was a good video.
Yeah.
Can I jump in for a little question? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ty.
I appreciate these answers from Chase and Savannah too, and reflecting on social media, which is so good. I'm curious though, kind of, I think Judy, you're getting to this point. The video basically was about a person expressing an experience. They were saying, in other words, what it's like or what it feels like to be Black, and the differences between maybe a Black person's experience and perspective versus non-Black. So my question would be, have you guys, and I'm curious to any of you really, have you guys ever thought about how different you may live, how different your daily life may be, the opportunities you get or your experiences? Did you guys understand the video to be that, and what are your thoughts on that? I want to know what you heard in the video, what you heard in the video.
Yep.
I heard, wait, can you
LJ, go ahead.
Oh, wait, is Chase trying to go?
No, you go ahead, go ahead.
You go.
So, yeah. Sorry, can you restate that? Because I'm like confused of exactly what you mean by heard.
This American truth, and that is that when those Europeans came to claim a land that was already home to other people, they also kidnapped and brought young people to work and build that country that Henry Ford said he didn't need any help. Well, the people that you see in this picture here and others that were brought from Africa against their will were working to build the United States and were not paid and were kept enslaved and oppressed. All of those things in the 20th century, which was the 1900s for us, looked like this. This is what, from 1600 to 1900, it became a place where people were segregated. They were put into areas that kept people away from each other. Laws were enforced. Segregation, what that means, which is taking people away from each other because of their culture. But how does that affect us as human beings, all of us as Americans? Down at the bottom, that shows you how many miles it is to something. This is called a residential security map from 1937. And it shows you the green areas. If you look at the map over here, happens to be Los Angeles. So in the green areas is where the white people lived. The second grade would be in blue would be what they call blue collar workers. So that'd be people like plumbers, electricians, people maybe that owned a grocery store or something like that. Jewish people might be in the yellow area, the third area. And then African Americans were to only be in the areas that had red and not to come into the other areas. It was strictly enforced. So that was segregation. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I want to hear from you. When we look at what it means to take people apart from each other so that they don't know each other, when you have a relationship, like we met each other over Zoom here, Rabbi Judy, who just joined us here, Brian, Sandra, and all of us, we have a relationship now. We know each other. But if you segregate people, if you keep people apart, they can never understand each other. They can never have relationships.
I guess my question would be, social media is a heavy resource towards information on what do you think and where do you get your information, if any, about racism or anti-Semitism from social media, or how what's your thinking behind it?
So it kind of depends what side of you see, because some people are on social media for sports or while some people are on it for news and a lot of
Mhm.
stuff. So a lot of stuff, social media can be good for like spreading the message, but I think it could also teach the wrong message at the same time. Like the police had to shoot this African American, or it could say a story that didn't happen. It can feed you a lot of false information, but it is good for spreading the message.
Savannah?
People, not everybody thinks this. People mostly just think social media is just for one thing, just for like posting pictures of your dog or like your avocado toast you ate this morning. There's a lot of people on there sending messages and saying things that happened to them, their experiences that might help people understand what happened, like to that person for what reason. And it just helps you see people all over the world, their things that are going on there, whether it's good or bad, improvements, people acknowledging terrible acts that have happened, like all the people that were talking about what happened to George Floyd being wrong. Is that activism? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
They
Opinions of activism.
Activism.
there's a lot of that on different platforms, and I've seen a lot lately, and I'm impressed.